Hello everyone, and welcome to Project Healthy Schools. This is Lesson 2, I Am From. In this lesson, students will be able to understand the society and geography and culture influence our food choices, observe and describe food preparations and presentations across different cultures, infer why certain cultures have certain food traditions, and express personal family food traditions through poetry. Vocabulary for this lesson includes the words culture, locavore, and food traditions. The materials you'll need to print off before starting is the I Am From poem and the World Food Culture Gallery chart. These documents should be attached to this video. Welcome back to Project Healthy Schools. Welcome to Lesson 2, where we'll be talking about food culture and how it influences the foods that we eat. Before we move on, let's think about what we learned in Lesson 1. We talked about SMART goals. We talked about setting healthy goals for ourselves. We talked about living a healthy lifestyle. And we talked about the 5 PHS goals. Hopefully that's fresh in your memory, and we will continue to circle back to that SMART goal that you set. So keep that in mind. But moving on into Lesson 2, the first thing we want to talk about is food culture. And what do we mean by food culture? We mean, how does the culture we live in, the parents we have, the places we live, how does that affect what we eat? Well, when you're a baby, do we know what to eat? Does an infant know what to eat? Well, obviously no. They're kind of just made to eat whatever their parents feed them. This is where food culture really starts to come into place. Every culture has a different kind of food that they like to feed kids. And a lot of it depends on the environment, and a lot of it depends on what's available. All right, so that's kind of where it starts. And we learn what to eat and what are good foods to eat and the things that we eat based on the caregivers that we have. Our parents, or whoever that caregiver has, whatever they're eating is probably what we're going to be eating at a young age. And we also are influenced by teachers and our educational system and people like me who try to teach you to eat healthy. But that's here in the United States. Not every country has the same food cultures, and that's what we're going to be focused on today. All right, so foods that we see as normal here in the United States are not normal in other places. And that's something that we really want to keep in mind. And we want to keep an open mind that there's probably a lot of food that you may like that is good for you, that isn't necessarily from the United States or isn't what we call normal here. But that brings us to our first vocabulary word, which is culture. So the definition of culture is how we live. It describes our behaviors, habits, beliefs, and attitudes. It is affected by our climate, our language, our religions, and where we are from. Now that we know what the word culture means, let's talk about our next vocabulary word. The next vocabulary word is food culture, and that's kind of what this lesson is entirely about. So what is food culture? Well, the definition of food culture is our behaviors and habits that shape how we grow, buy, prepare, and eat food. So an example of that in the United States is the different kind of foods that are eaten in the South. Southern culture has its own kinds of foods, and that stands true to other parts of the country. Countries that maybe are close to a coastline have a culture based on seafood and food that is caught in the ocean. So that's a good example of that. But food culture changes over time, and one thing to kind of think about, even in the United States, it's changed a lot. Do you think Lunchables existed 50 years ago? Well, no, Lunchables kind of came about due to Americans' value of food that is quick and convenient to eat. America tends to have a culture of busyness and on-the-go type lifestyles, and a Lunchable kind of is something that stepped into place to fit that. So that's how cultures can change over time. But we're going to be talking not just about the United States and the different food cultures in the United States, but the world in general. And I think there's so many different kinds of foods throughout the world that this should be interesting to you. And hopefully you all already know of some other foods that come from other places in the world. But if you can think right now, if you have a partner with you or if you have someone working with you, go ahead and pause the video and talk to them about some foods in other places of the world that are considered normal that aren't necessarily considered normal here. Go ahead and pause me for a second and either think to yourself or talk to your neighbor or talk to your parent. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you had a chance to think about that. Hopefully you came up with some great ideas on your own. But to help you out, check out these examples. So think about gumbo and Creole is a big staple in the state of Louisiana. And that's something that's just in our country. But then when we think of Italy, we often think of pasta as we think of Italian food. Sushi definitely is something we associate with the country of Japan. Food culture is constantly changing and is affected by immigration and sharing of new different foods, climate change, and new technology or machines we use to grow and prepare foods. Before we start our next activity, let's take a brain break. So let's get up out of our chairs and let's get our hearts pumping a little bit. All right, hopefully you found some space to move around in a little bit. For our brain break today, we're going to use two exercises. We're going to use a burpee and a plank. So I'm going to show you those two exercises first, and then I'm going to tell you exactly what we're going to do for our brain break today. So first of all, a burpee, if you don't know, is a combination of several things. It's a great total body exercise using only your body weight. So we're going to start the down position with our chest on the floor. We're going to push up. We're going to bring our feet to our hands, and we're going to jump. That's one burpee. All right? The other exercise I want to show you today is a simple plank, a 4-point plank, which is basically the top of our push-up position. Our hands we want to have directly underneath our shoulders and our feet together. Okay? We're going to make sure that our core is really engaged here and we're nice and flat. Right, using those two exercises, we're going to do this quick little workout to get our blood flowing and get us ready for the rest of this lesson. So we're going to do a countdown. We're going to do 5 burpees, and then we're going to hold that 4-point plank for 10 seconds. Then we're going to do 4 burpees, and we're going to hold the 4-point plank for 10 seconds. Then 3 burpees, hold the plank, 2 burpees, hold the plank, 1 burpee, and to finish, we're going to hold that plank for 10 seconds. So in between each set of our burpees, we're going to hold the plank. So we're going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 with a plank in between. Are we ready? I'll go ahead and demonstrate and then you guys can do it. Here we go. Welcome back. Hopefully after that little bit of physical activity, you're feeling ready to move on. So for our next activity, you're going to need the World Food Culture Gallery chart, which was attached to this video. So make sure you have that with you. Once you print that off, it's a sheet that looks like this. It says I am from worksheet, and it's going to give you an opportunity to compare the difference between the South Korean family we're going to see and the Ethiopian family we're going to see. You're going to get to look at things that are different from what you and your family practice. You're also going to be able to make some comments on what you see that is similar. But before we jump into this and start looking at the photos, let's make sure we look at a map and know exactly where these two countries are.
So let's take a look at where South Korea is. Notice it is in East Asia between the Sea of Japan and the Yellow Sea. Ethiopia, on the other hand, is in Northeast Africa. Ethiopia is landlocked and does not have any coastline. These geographic features will play a factor in each country's food culture. Let's take a look at a South Korean family dinner. Think about how your family eats together. How is the family dining in a way that is different or similar to your family? Notice the family is sitting on the floor, which is different than in the United States. There is a large silver grill on the table, maybe for cooking food, and the family is using chopsticks rather than forks. As we look closer at what the family is eating, what do you notice about the type of food in the pictures and the way it is served? How is it different or similar to foods we eat and the way we eat? Notice the fish in the picture is whole. The foods are served in many different small bowls rather than each person having their own plate. They are also using lettuce leaves as wraps rather than bread. and rice is a common staple with every meal. Now let's take a look at an Ethiopian family dinner. Once again, let's look at how this family is eating together and compare it to the way your family eats together. Notice the family is sitting around a low table, and as opposed to having many different dishes, the family is eating off of shared plates. Now let's take a closer look at the Ethiopian food. The foods are eaten off of one big platter without serving utensils. They use a form of flatbread to pick up the food. The texture of the food seems to be rather mushy, and there's not very much meat. People normally eat most of this food using the bread and using their hands. After looking at these pictures of two different cultures of food, let's go back to our sheet and fill some of our blanks in. Let's talk about what's different and similar to our own family based on the South Korean family's dinner and the Ethiopian family's dinner. Let's review some of our observations, and let's go over your worksheet. Remember, in South Korea we noticed there was a whole fish served. Food was served in many different dishes and bowls. Lettuce leaves were used as wraps instead of bread, and rice was served with almost every meal. Ethiopian family ate off of one big platter without utensils. The food texture was rather mushy, there's not very much meat on the plate, and they ate the food using flatbread or with their hands. So why do you think some of the differences between your food culture and the food culture in the pictures exists? Well, in South Korea, they're near the ocean, so there's lots of fish and seaweed available. They grow a lot of rice, and they eat it with almost every meal. In Ethiopia, they eat off the shared platter because family mealtime is very important to their culture. There's not a lot of meat because meat is hard to come by in Ethiopia. They eat a lot of lentils and beans, which grow well there. These are all things that affect our food culture and affect the foods that each country is accustomed to eating.
The next thing we're going to talk about today is what it means to eat local. So raise your hand if you've ever visited a farmer's market or gone to eat food that was grown close to your city or close to your town. Hopefully a lot of you have. So our next vocabulary word is the word locavore. It's kind of a tricky word, so let's break it into two pieces. Let's first look at the ending of the word. The sound vor, or the part of the word vor, indicates what? Where have you heard that before? Well, the first thing that popped into my head is the word carnivore or herbivore. Carnivore is something that eats only meat. An herbivore is something that eats only plants. We even have what we call an omnivore, which is something that eats both. Human beings are normally omnivores. And a lot of other animals are omnivores. And those are things that eat plants and meat. So what does vor mean? Well, let's say that vor means to eat. Let's look at the beginning of the word now. What about the word loca? Well, that sounds very similar to what we're talking about. The word local and the word loca sound very similar. So a locavore is someone who eats locally, someone who eats food that is grown locally. So by definition, what we're going to call it is to eat food that was grown from a nearby location. All right, so locavores try to eat food that is grown within a 100-mile radius of where they live. Now, there's a lot of benefits to this. One of those being, of course, is that we're supporting businesses and farmers and food makers that are nearby to us, which supports our communities. But it also it helps the environment. It cuts back on gas costs to transport food. Food that is transported across the country, it takes a lot more money and gas to get that to us when we could simply buy the foods that are available closer to us. So that is what we mean by eating local. You know, and probably the one of the most important things or the most beneficial things about eating local is that the food is fresh. We know that the food hasn't been being moved around. A lot of times things that come from across the country, you know, were grown or processed a long time ago. All right, if we're eating local, we know that that food is a lot more fresh than the food that's been shipped across the country. So there's a lot of benefits to eating locally.
So what are some fruits and vegetables that are grown in the state of Michigan? Michigan's primary crops include apples, asparagus, corn, cherries, and beans. But Michigan is also known for many other things. Taking a look at this picture, we can see a lot of the things that are grown in Michigan. Tomatoes, broccoli, eggplant, carrots, blueberries, and strawberries, to name a few.
So today we spent a lot of time thinking about other food cultures. So for our final activity, we're going to let you think about your own food culture and foods that are specific to your family and your culture. We all have a food culture that is unique to us. What we eat is affected by much more than what we just prefer, but also from the environment that is around us, and also from the food that is available to us, as well as the food that was exposed to us when we were young. What we think of, a lot of families specifically have traditions for the kind of foods they eat during certain times of the year. One family could be different from the other. We call those things food traditions. Each family maybe eats a certain dish at a certain time of year, or consistently eats those kind of things on a consistent basis. But that's not always the same for every family. So every family kind of has its own culture. So I want you to start thinking about that now for this last activity. So for our final activity, you're going to need your I am from poem sheet. So go ahead and make sure you have that in front of you as we go through some examples. So we have some examples in front of us here, okay? We're gonna take a look, and we just spent time examining all these other food cultures. Let's think about our own food culture by first listing some of the family's food traditions and then creating a poem. So as you can see, we have these categories. I am from the smell of, I am from the taste of, I am from the sight of, I am from the sound of, I am from the touch of. So we want to really think about things that remind us of these things. And these are going to be unique and personal to you. As you can look, we have some examples. I am from the smell of fresh baked cookies as they come from school.
I am from the taste of sour lemonade during the summer. I am from the sight of my aunt and mom running around the kitchen to cook a delicious Thanksgiving dinner. I am from the sound of stovetop popcorn popping before a family movie night. And I am from the touch of kneading dough for my homemade sourdough bread. So using your own examples, let's fill in the blanks and create your own I am from food culture poem.
Well, it's time to close up our lesson now. I want to ask you 3 questions, and hopefully you learned something from today. But the first question I want to ask you is, how do culture, experience, and environment affect one's health? Well, hopefully your answer to that is that our family culture and traditions shape our food choices. Where we live affects the foods that are available to us and use. Hopefully you learned that from this lesson. The next question I want to ask you is, what is one change you would like to see within your own family food culture? Now, while a lot of the things we've talked about are positive things, and a lot of our food culture things are most likely positive, they could also be negative. If we have a culture of eating unhealthy foods, and we have a culture in our family and a tradition of that, that's maybe something that we would like to change. Maybe that's something to talk to your family about if you feel like the habit within your family is to eat unhealthy. The last thing that kind of ties into that I want to ask you is, what is one message from today's food culture lesson that you will share with someone else? Hopefully you learned something from today, and hopefully this has opened your mind to other food cultures and other foods around the world. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. I will be talking to you soon. I'll see you in lesson 3.